Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another one. I have here two film SLR cameras, the Nikon FM and the Nikon FE. They are almost identical machines, but one of them, with careful maintenance, will last pretty much indefinitely, whereas the other one almost certainly won't. If you want a camera that will outlast you, check out this episode. By the mid-1970s, photography had a very long history, and there were lots and lots of different kinds of cameras around, and the industry was booming. There was a variety of cameras like this rangefinder, 35mm rangefinder from Leica, or this film SLR, 35mm film SLR from Nikon, or cameras like this Rolleiflex that takes 120 film. That's a bigger film than 35mm and makes very high definition images. And there were bigger cameras that you put big glass plates into. There were bellows cameras, there were medical cameras. There were all manner of cameras, but the important thing is these were all manual cameras. So these are all cameras where the photographer had to read the light themselves with a light meter. This is a little one here that just pops on the top on the hot or cold shoe of a camera, and that's a really good tool. So they all involved the photographer reading the light with a light meter and inputting the values of aperture and shutter speed into the camera themselves. There was no assistance from the camera. The camera was an entirely passive device. It didn't make any suggestions about what you ought to do. It didn't give you any hints and tips. There was no automation. The camera could do nothing except accept the values that the photographer put into it. So all of the processing for working out the light values in these manual cameras was done by the photographer. The camera didn't do any of it at all. The camera was an entirely passive device. The important thing to note about these cameras is that aside from inbuilt light meters that quite a few of the film SLRs have, like this Nikon, aside from an inbuilt light meter, there are no electronics at all in these cameras. If you took this little Leica apart, for example, all you would find inside it are springs and gears and levers. These are completely passive devices. The shutter, let's wind the shutter. The shutter, as you will see, is powered by the photographer's hand. Isn't that beautiful? The timings of the shutter, the very precise times that it's required to open, like 1/25th of a second or 1/250th of a second, those speeds are determined by the distance it takes a certain gear to move in a certain time under a certain spring pressure. So all the information needed to run this camera, and all these mechanical cameras, all the information needed to run them, unlike modern cameras which store their information electronically, all the information needed to run these cameras is stored mechanically, physically, in the shape of a lever, for example, in the number of teeth on a gear wheel, on the size of a gear wheel. Everything, all the information is encoded mechanically, and that is a beautifully simple system. By the mid-70s, however, a new kind of camera had begun to appear, and this Nikon FE is a good example of it. It looks exactly like the FM that we looked at earlier, but this FE has an electronically controlled shutter, not mechanically controlled, electronically controlled shutter opening times, and that marked a big change in cameras. Mechanical cameras can go out of adjustment over time. They go out of adjustment with things like changing temperature, with wear on the gears and the bearings, And even when in absolute tip-top condition, perfectly adjusted, they were never absolutely accurate. This little Leica, for example, on the 100th of a second shutter speed, let's say, it's probably not running at exactly 100th of a second. It will be somewhere near, but it won't be exactly 100th of a second. Well, now, if I wanted this Nikon FE to shoot at 100th of a second, or 1/2/5 in the modern speeds, I just set it to 1/2/5 and the shutter will open for exactly 1/125th of a second. And at the time, that was quite an advance because it meant there was just that little bit more precision. And as well as more precision, these cameras, these electronic cameras, can do aperture priority shooting or shutter priority shooting, and that's a real boon. I remember at the time in the mid to late 70s thinking what a wonderful technical advance that was and how great it would be to shoot an automated camera and how much better it would be than shooting my Fed 4 camera, which of course was all mechanical. So we've got coming in now some automation, some assistance, and that meant the cameras were rather easier to use, but it made it more or less certain that one day they will fail. And now as they get older, it wasn't too bad, when they were being made and when mechanical cameras were still a thing, or when film cameras were still a thing. But now as they get older, 40, 50 odd years old, it becomes more likely with every day that passes that these electronic cameras will fail. How do I know that an electronic camera like this will fail? How can I be so sure of it? Well, of course, I can't be absolutely sure. This Nikon FE, for example, is in very good order and it shows no sign of conking out just yet. It might last another 50 years, it might last another 100 years, or it might just last a couple of days. The thing is, there's no real way of knowing. But I know what does damage electronics. Extremes of temperature and temperature changes are a big factor in why electronics fail. So temperature changes, heat cycles, warmth, a little bit too much warmth than they were designed for, a little bit too much cold than they were designed for, that can cause failures. Mechanical shocks, of course, can cause failures, leakage from batteries, and who knows what else, just degeneration of electrical components over time. As I say, any electronic camera might last the next 50 years, or it might conk out tomorrow. There's just no way of knowing. Now, of course, it's not just electronic cameras that wear out and fail. Mechanical cameras do that too, and they will do that. A mechanical camera will not last an indefinite period of time if it's not serviced. But when it goes wrong, it can be repaired, and I'm thinking of current times and future times to come. These mechanical cameras can be repaired much more easily than an obsolete electronic camera. They're less complex, they're much more straightforward, and somebody will always be able to fix them. Previous generations of mechanical camera engineers have sort of thinned out a little by this point, and a lot of the old guard have retired and aren't in the business anymore. But I know for a fact that these skills of repairing mechanical cameras have been passed on. There are a number of people who are very, very talented at repairing these cameras. Anybody with a bit of mechanical aptitude and patience will be able to repair one of these cameras if you study up on what you're doing. Anybody with a lathe will be able to make parts for one of these cameras. So I'd say the outlook is good. Somebody will always be able to fix a mechanical camera, and that is not so for an electronic one. It would be much more difficult to repair the electronics of a camera like this one. A simple circuit board, yes, that's possible if there are single components like resistors and transistors that need to be soldered into place. They can be replaced, but microelectronics is a very, very different ball game, and these cameras emerged at the time that microelectronics was also emerging. Integrated circuits and silicon chips are just not designed to be repaired. They're designed to be removed, chucked away and replaced. Now, it may be, in fact it probably will be, that one day such things as microelectronics may be very simple to reproduce. One day in the future it might be no more difficult than simply printing one out on some fancy 3D printer of some kind. But that day is not here yet, and I don't think that day will be with us for quite some time. So for the moment, these electronic cameras, wonderful as they are, and I do really like them, these electronic cameras are on borrowed time. I've got quite a few of them and I like them and I use them. I love aperture priority shooting, so I do use them for that mode, and quite often when I don't really want to be bothered with sort of reading the light myself too closely, I will pick up one of these electronic cameras if I want to shoot some film. And you know, I use mine, they're working fine for the moment, and they might last a long time, but they might not. And if one day they do all conk out, I'll still have some mechanical cameras to fall back on. So if you want a camera that's really going to last and that you can, you know, even pass on to people eventually, go mechanical. And I'm going to show you some nice mechanical cameras that you can buy. Some of my favorite cameras are the little Leica cameras from the 30s, called the Barnack Leicas, after their creator Oscar Barnack. They're really small and portable. They've got collapsible lenses, so you can collapse them down for storage and they'll fit into your pocket if you've got a big pocket. You can buy a body for one of these for probably around 150, 200 pounds, something like that. Though these have got a little bit expensive lately. They used to be cheaper. A body with a lens, I don't know, anywhere from 400 to 800 pounds depending on the camera and the lens. But if you don't want to go to all that expense, and it is quite a lot of expense, you can use one of these. This is the Zorky one. This is a Russian camera, and they were also made in the Ukraine by Fed, the Fed one. This is an identical copy of the Leica, absolutely identical in every detail, apart from the finish. The finish is not as fine as that on the Leica, the polish is not as fine as that on the Leica, and so on. But the finish and the polish is very, very nice, and I really, really like these little cameras. They're very nice cameras in and of themselves. So this is a nice cheap way to get the Barnack Leica experience. Lovely, lovely little cameras. This one's got a Ukrainian Industar 22 on it at the moment. This is another collapsible, so it just collapses down nice and easy, if I can remember how to do it. Nice and easy for storage or putting into a brackets, big closed brackets pocket. If you want an SLR, there are lots of options. There are other rangefinders as well that are nice and cheap. All the former Soviet rangefinders like the Zorky 4, the Zorky 4K and the Fed 4, but I won't go into detail on those. Those are all nice and cheap and available. A Zorky 1 will cost you, what, between, I don't know, 60 if you're lucky to 120 if you pay a higher price. About 60 to 120 pounds for one of these with a lens. Very, very nice kit. If you prefer an SLR camera, and they are a little easier to use, I find, than a rangefinder, then the Nikon FM that we've looked at already is a very, very good choice. This is a really fantastic camera. It's very, very simple. It's not over designed. everything's presented straightforwardly, simply, clearly and plainly. It's got everything it needs and nothing it doesn't, and it's beautifully made. I guess one of these would cost you maybe between 150 to 200 for a body, perhaps 200 to 400 for a body with a lens, depending on the kind of lens that you want. And all of the major manufacturers made a mechanical camera. With Olympus, it was the OM1. The Canon cameras, I'm not sure, I'll put it on screen, but they made a mechanical camera. But there were other choices as well. This is the East German Praktica. These are a bit cheaper. In fact, they're a lot cheaper. This is a great camera. It's really simple. It reminds me of the Nikon FM in many ways. It's not quite as nicely polished or finished, but it is a very good camera in its own right. A really good manual film SLR with an M42 mount, so it will shoot around about 5,000 lenses or so. I think that's the number that were made, a rough number of M42 lenses that were made. So no shortage of lenses and a really good camera. There's also, oh, by the way, these will cost, what, between 40 to £100 with a lens, depending on what lens. You might get lucky. Sometimes you'll get one with a CZJ Pancolar 51.8 on it. And those are beautiful lenses. There's also another cheap option that's not got a lens on at the moment. This is the Zenit E, but there's the Zenit B also. The Zenit B cameras were very nice manual cameras. The Zenit E is a very similar manual camera. Again, no frills, nothing you don't need and everything you do need, except with the Zenit cameras you don't get a little prism in the center of the focusing screen, the little circular split prism. So all you've got to focus in these cameras is, you know, looking at the image and do your eyes tell you it's sharp enough. There's no screen that you get in other SLR cameras with a little prism on it that makes it easier. So these are for people, all of which to say, these are for people with good eyesight. So there's a lot of mechanical cameras about. If you want to shoot some 120 film, you can use, bear with me a minute, you can use a camera like this, the Rolleiflex. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but we can briefly talk about it again. These are twin lens reflex cameras, and they have a great big roll of 120 film, which is very wide. You can see how wide it is there by the width of the back, and the actual shot itself is about as long again. So they give square images on a square negative and give very high definition. Rolleiflexes are not cheap. This is one of the cheaper ones. This is the MX EVS, but I think even these are worth about, I don't know, £400 to £600, something like that. So these are not cheap. Do remember, if you do buy one of these and you use it and you don't get on with it, as long as you look after it and you haven't paid too much for it, you will always be able to get your money back, because they're not making any of these cameras anymore, and there's still a demand for them. There's a limited demand chasing a dwindling supply, so you will always get your money back if you didn't pay too much in the first place. There are cheaper alternatives from, oh gosh, who makes these? I think Mamiya made a very nice one, Minolta made a nice cheap one, Yashica made a cheaper one. Very nice cameras with very nice lenses. Just not the price or the kudos of the Rolleiflex, but these will give you the manual camera experience like no other. If you want a manual camera, these are as manual as it gets. That is to say, they're as mechanical and old-fashioned looking as it gets. They really look like a mechanical camera, is what I'm trying not very well to say. But there are loads of options. There's simply, you know, practically almost no limit to the kinds of cameras you can buy in mechanical flavour, but they will last. They're available now relatively cheaply, and if you want one, now's the time to buy, because prices are not going down. There's still a demand chasing a dwindling supply, so that situation isn't changing. The value of these cameras can only go up. So if you want one, get in quickly, I would say, before prices go too much higher. My recommendations, well, if you want a rangefinder, the Zorki one is brilliant, as is the Zorki 4 or 4K or Fed 4. Those are lovely cameras. If you want an SLR, well, I've recommended the Nikon. The Praktica is also a great camera. Also, I would recommend both of those as a good place to start. But what's certain is that if you look after these cameras, a camera like this will last pretty much indefinitely. For example, just a quick example. This Rolleiflex came to me a couple of years ago. A friend gave it to me very kindly. She didn't want it anymore. It belonged to her husband. And it wasn't in perfect order when it came to me. Some of the speeds were a little slow and the slow speeds weren't working properly. So I had it cleaned, lubricated and adjusted. You might sometimes see that as CLA, by a gentleman called Brian Mickleborough, who was factory trained in these Rolleiflexes. And he cleaned it up, oiled it, greased it, lubricated it, even put a couple of new parts in where there was a little bit of wear on the gear teeth. So this camera now, it was what, 70 years old when it came to me. This camera now is ready for another 70 years of service. And, you know, when the time comes, I hope it's still being enjoyed and used. So there we are. Lots and lots of fantastic mechanical cameras available. I recommend you to try one if you haven't tried one already. It's a beautiful experience. It's a simple experience. It's a plain and clear experience with nothing standing in your way and nothing mediating the light. All there is light, film, camera, photographer. And that's it. So there we are. All right, well, I guess that's it from me for now. Many thanks for watching, and if you've watched this far, particular thanks to you. Many thanks to subscribers. If you've enjoyed this show, why not chuck us a sub? That would be appreciated. Many thanks to patrons. If you've enjoyed this show and you like this channel and you think, well, this guy's not doing too bad a job of keeping this old gear alive and in use, you might want to become a patron yourself over at www.patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that from as little as $1 per month. As for me, that is it for now. So many thanks for watching, and if you're not doing anything too irksome, bothersome, awkward or annoying around this time next week, please do check in and join me for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.